But welcome, everybody. I want to encourage you to call, please. The call number is 1-347-326-9626. Dial 1 to get on the air. I'm Michael Komorn, your host, and we've got a very, very exciting show tonight. As we mentioned, a redo of the Jeff Irwin episode from last week. There's been some very, very exciting news. An introduction of House Bill 4623 to decriminalize cannabis in Michigan. We're going to hear from Jeff Irwin, the architect and sponsor of the bill, and well, there's several other sponsors as well, but he was the architect, and I understand he's been getting some tremendous support across the state, and it's just fascinating right now. We're excited to hear from him, and of course, everyone on the show is a big fan of his. Also, we're going to have what we like to call the godfather of marijuana in Michigan, our good friend Tim Beck, and critic of the technical issues. We appreciate Tim's support and expectations of it, because we want to produce every week. We want to bring the best that we can to our listeners, and he's right, so I'm not going to fight with Tim about that. We're excited to hear from him. He was actually present at the launching of the bill, I think, as was many others, but also had an interesting experience with some of the naysayers of medical marijuana in a undercover classified intel gathering, which he's going to report on. I may have overstated that. Also, the spotlight this week, as we have in the previous 2 weeks, some of which were unable to be heard because of the technical difficulties, but talking about the various national and state organizations that are involved in cannabis reform and medical cannabis. National Patients' Rights Association spokesperson and Vice Chair Drew Driver, and the legislative liaison, our good friend Robin Schneider, will be calling in. Also Jack Hoffman, the attorney for the Decriminalize Grand Rapids, will be on to discuss the state of that initiative that was passed this last election in Grand Rapids and the ordinance that was to take effect as of May the 1st. Do we have a status update on that right now? In effect or not?
Supposed to be in effect. What's going on? We'll have to wait and find out from Mr. Hoffman.
So odd, because you would think that people vote on something, there shouldn't really be an issue, right? Don't we live in a democracy? But
I've heard that it sounds like the agreement to get it implemented sounds better on the surface than it actually is, so I'm kind of interested in that.
Unfortunate. As we continue here, I'm going to rant a little while. We're going to have some news, current events. In the studio with us, our good friend and lawyer, David Radoy. Thank you for being here, David.
Thank you, Mike. Always happy to be here.
David is going to give us his insight into the legal issues that are going to come up. I've given him an assignment to look at something. We're also going to discuss a trial court ruling recently on a case of significance on remand from the Supreme Court. Also in the studio, we've got Jamie Lowell of the Third Coast Compassion Club.
Hello.
We're going to have Rick Thompson calling in from the road to participate. He may even be on the line right now, but Rick, of course, is the editor-in-chief of the Compassion Chronicles and many, many other things. Chad is in the studio from Birmingham Compassion Club. Chad, thanks for being here.
Good evening. It's nice to be here.
And, of course, tonight's show is being brought to you by Komorn Law, 1-800-656-3557, and the Michigan Medical Marijuana Association, michiganmedicalmarijuana.org. I want to thank all the moderators and administrators that work diligently to try to create a safe environment for the medical cannabis community to evolve the conversation. Also, shout out to our good friends in the Ostemo, Michigan area from the MedJoint Community Compassion Center, Kevin Spiller. I don't think he listens to the show anymore. I might stop. Just kidding. And those are our sponsors. So much to talk about. We got a really exciting guest lineup, as you can see. Did I hit everybody? We got. All right. Next week, I just want to preview the show. We're gonna have Bruce Block on from Grand Rapids. We're going to talk a little bit about the experience of the People versus Ballsma. Many of you may remember this was the second case that went to the Michigan Supreme Court. It reinforced the original decision by the Supreme Court, both of which, I'm talking about King and Kalanick, that was the first Michigan Supreme Court, and then, of course, Ballsma. And it was a unanimous decision in reaffirming the defenses of Section 4 and Section 8 and reinforcing the standard of proof and what needs to be established and how Section 4 has nothing to do with Section 8. And interestingly enough, as it goes sometimes, the Ballsma case was remanded in the circuit court, and the trial judge had a go at the Section 8 hearing and rendered an opinion denying them a right to get to a jury. And it is an outrageous opinion. We're going to talk about that. Many people don't understand how the law seemingly sometimes reads one thing and is something else. Anyway, so I'm even work that back in here in a second. But we'll do my rant here, and then we're going to get our callers on. I think we've got Rick Thompson standing by to call in, and, of course, Jeff Irwin and Tim Beck right at 8:15. All right, so I just briefly want to talk about something a little bit outside of the medical cannabis or cannabis reform, but it does have an impact here, which is this moving forward of the welfare bill, which is
4118.
4118. And it was brought to my attention and by a reporter that called and wanted to know my thoughts on it and see if there was anyone that was interested in putting a face on the potential impact that the passing of this bill may have. Now, I understand the stage of the bill is that it's been passed by the House.
Yes.
And I have it here. And
77 to 33.
Right. And what does it mean? And I don't know, and I'm not taking a position right now in welfare one way or the other. However people feel about it is what the law is, and people rely upon it, and that's the law. This is a new law that creates a potential mechanism whereby people who are testing positive for controlled substances would lose their welfare benefits. There's a different, tiers, in terms of how that can happen, and different remedies that you would have to go through, all of which you would lose your funding for while this is taking place. And when I understand it came out of the committee or was voted on the floor of the House, amendments were proposed by many Democrats. And this is how it was reported to me by the reporter, and I think it's fair to say we're going to maybe ask Jeff Irwin about that a little bit. But the response, they were all denied. The amendments were not added to allow for a exception for medical marijuana patients. Meaning, if you're a medical marijuana patient, you're on, Family Independence Program, FIP?
I'm not sure about the names of the program, but I can say that it's Marcia Hovey Wright that tried to introduce amendments to protect medical marijuana patients from Muskegon.
And to make all the legislative drug tests.
And to make all the legislative drug tests. Anyways, my point is that it was suggested that they had this exception for people that are receiving the benefits who are medical marijuana patients not to be subject to these same penalties, probably because it's unfair, it's a medicine, and the state has allowed them to do that. The response by the originators of the bill was that this is a federal program, and we don't want to interfere with that. Now, what does that really mean? And I just want to talk for a second. This is a interesting situation that many of these people that would have said that, responded to that, are, without question, states' rights advocates. Meaning they believe that federal government's overbearing. They believe that they don't want to, allow for expansion programs, more jobs being, fulfilled or created through the federal government. They want it to be in the private sector, and they want the federal government to back off and allow the states to do what they want to do. For example, many of the people that supported this drug testing and rejected the exception for medical marijuana patients are people that agreed with and supported the state of Arizona when they enacted a immigration law. And the federal government sued them to say that you cannot do that. That's a federal-controlled law. We occupy the field, and the states are not allowed to do that. But Michigan was one of the states, led by the Attorney General, that no, states' rights. States have a right to create these laws when the federal government is enacting. This is a sovereignty issue, 10th Amendment. Likewise, many of these same politicians from this group that I'm speaking of, in joining also our Attorney General, joined in a lawsuit to oppose the federal government's implementation of a new health care program, saying that the states are sovereign and being successful even on a First Amendment issue regarding religion, but nonetheless a states' rights issue. Now, I just mentioned that to draw up the contrast and the significance of the contrast of how when the medical marijuana patients, clearly a states' rights issue, states' right to create its own and control its own medical issues, create laws to vote in by the people to treat conditions as they see fit. And now we have a complete lack of acknowledgement of it in what is a critical issue. And what I'm saying is these same persons, their party, passed laws to amend the act, telling people that we are going to fill the holes in the Swiss cheese that exists, and we've acted lame duck. We've created amendments. They all went into effect April 1st. 4 years into the program, and now, for all intents and purposes, saying that it doesn't matter, that our acceptance of it, our amendments seemingly acknowledging that this law exists and adding to it to make it better and having to own it in some capacity, doesn't matter to welfare recipients who are also medical marijuana patients. And I find this to be unjust and outrageous, and I encourage people to call your representatives, your senators, and tell them that they should vote no unless there's at least some kind of condition relative to medical marijuana patients. But I think really there's a bigger conversation here, which is if anyone thinks that by testing and finding people, even if it's recreational purposes, with marijuana in their system, and they think the solution is to take away their benefits that they're supporting themselves and or their kids and put them into a drug treatment program for marijuana is going to be a solution, I ask those people that support that principle to just look at the facts, look at how that is a losing battle. It has been, and oddly enough, it seems to be the creation of so many jobs in the drug testing atmosphere. Like you're seemingly taking money out of the welfare recipients' pockets and dumping it into this drug testing because there's all these programs and counseling associated with it. It just seems like a lot of waste in a failed policy. All right, so I want to rant a little bit more after I finish that topic. I got a couple minutes, right? No?
Sure.
All right. I want to talk some good news, then bad news, and then we're going to take a break. Good news, there was a remand recently from the Michigan Supreme Court on the case that Komorn Law was involved in. It was one of the first cases to go to a jury trial in the state relative to Michigan medical marijuana. And it was so early that it was before the prosecutors started arguing that there was no medical marijuana defense if you violated Section 4 of the Act. And it was a crazy case with our dear friends out in Genesee County, but it was really all Oakland County sheriff's cases. People versus Pointer, Chase and Pointer went through a hell of a 3 or 4 year period of time, tortured both in Genesee County and Oakland County. We had great success in Oakland County getting to a jury and them offering them a misdemeanor, which we gladly took with no probation and went about our way after many, many, many days of fighting. Furthermore, in the Genesee County trial, Judge Nethercutt ruled in a directed verdict in our favor for a number of different reasons, and so begins the real procedural story. But a directed verdict is the equivalent of a verdict by a jury in 45 states in the United States. Michigan is one of the few states up until recently that acknowledged a difference between a judge directing a verdict, saying that I'm directing a verdict in favor of the defendant, versus the jury. The Michigan Supreme Court of the law of the land in Michigan has been that judges can be reversed when they make those kind of rulings. This is unique compared to other states because the concept of double jeopardy, meaning that once a ruling, a final judgment has been made while a defendant has been put in jeopardy or after a defendant's put in jeopardy, he cannot then be put in the same jeopardy or in jeopardy twice. Michigan had a distinction. If you had a jury and that was the reason, if the jury ruling was an error, they're not going to make you retry it. But if a judge's ruling was an error, despite the rules of jeopardy, Michigan allowed you to be retried. Pointer got a verdict from a judge granting my motion for directed verdict. It was taken to the Court of Appeals, and they followed the Michigan law and reversed and remanded to the trial court to start the whole thing over again 4 years later. And before that happened, it was appealed to the U.S. Michigan Supreme Court, but simultaneously, the law of the land in Michigan, which was as I explained to you, one of only 5 states, was being heard by the United States Supreme Court. And they ruled that the way that Michigan has been doing it is wrong. This is about the second or third case I've talked about relative to the United States Supreme Court saying that Michigan law is wrong in a case called People versus Evans, and they ruled consistently with what much of the country has in terms of double jeopardy means double jeopardy. We're not going to let the state lower the protections that the Constitution and the 14th Amendment afford those individuals. And for that reason, the Michigan Supreme Court, in light of that, remanded the case back to the Court of Appeals to set aside and vacate their original opinion and issue an opinion consistent with the United States Supreme Court opinion, which should be one in our favor. All right, so that's it. I think I ran on too much. I think we had people that are probably going to be calling in shortly. But the bad news was, and I'm just going to break with this, and David's got the opinion. We're going to talk about it. Despite what the law says, despite the potentially silver lining that I talk about sometime on the show regarding Section 8, there are judges out there that are not following the law. And instead of talking about the bad ruling right now, I just want to say, if there's anything I can close with, it's that please get informed about the judicial system and some of the tragedies that take place, and that much of the resistance to the implementation of a vote by a majority of people in the state of Michigan has come from the judicial system. That's all the way across the board. District courts, circuit court, Court of Appeals, and Supreme Court. And I encourage people to get involved. Every year there's an election where judges are in the race. They seemingly get by because they're not party designated. I want people to become more aware of this, where the judges exist that are completely disregarding the law. David, who's the judge on that opinion in Grand Rapids that's forcing poor Ballsman to go back to the Court of Appeals?
George Buth.
I understand not one case has been granted for a Section 8 dismissal in Grand Rapids or gotten to a jury. This is absurd. This opinion we're going to talk about is absurd. These judges need to be held accountable to at least following what the voters have instructed them to. All right, so that's the rant. We are going to take a break. You're listening to Planet Green Juice. The call number is 1-347-326-9626. We'll be right back.